Joining us now, former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's also a CNBC contributor, sits on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. Dr. Gottlieb, good to see you. How big of a reassuring factor was that to hear that 62% figure from Gilead this morning?
Yeah, the news was encouraging. There's no question about it. But this is a trial that needs to be replicated with a prospectively randomized study. What it was a study where everyone got the drug. So it was an open-label study where they were comparing two different doses, a 5-day course and a 10-day course. And what they did in the study was they looked at the patients in the study, and they tried to match them with similar patients who weren't getting the drug. And then they compared those two groups. And they found that the Remdesivir patients did better than their matched controls. So this was pre-specified. They knew they were going to do this analysis. But it's not the kind of rigorous trial that we usually rely on to draw conclusions about whether drugs are working and, in fact, they're having a benefit on something like death. The company does have a more rigorous study that they did where they randomly assigned patients to either receive Remdesivir or standard of care. The results of those studies, that was done by the NIH, and the result of that study that addresses whether or not there's a survival advantage with getting Remdesivir, that should be out in August. So the top-line results of that study have already come out. They had to wait a little longer to get the results on whether or not it was having an effect on mortality, and that will come out in August.
Speaking of mortality, Dr. Gottlieb, stocks continue to hit new highs, and one of the common threads, the narratives out there are that even though cases are rising and reaching record levels in this country, mortality rates are not. At the height of the pandemic, when we saw New York explode, we were at, 2,500 deaths per day? Even with these spikes that we're getting this week, it's about 900 per day. Can they stay at these lower levels, given the experience we have, the better treatment options, and the age range of the people who are actually contracting this disease?
Well, possibly. I mean, New York made a lot of mistakes early on. The infection got into populations like nursing home patients, and that's why you saw an excess of mortality. And the city was heavily seeded with infection before we really knew how widely it was circulating. So a lot of mistakes were made. We've learned from that, and we're doing a lot of things differently. And in-hospital mortality has come down because we're treating patients more effectively. We have many more therapeutics like steroids, like Remdesivir, like using anticoagulation to thin blood of patients because a lot of patients were dying of blood clots, like not intubating patients as aggressively. So I wouldn't be surprised if we could cut in-hospital mortality significantly. But the sheer number of infections that are occurring in these states, you're going to start to see mortality go back up. The infection isn't going to stay in a younger population. There's so much infection in states like Florida, it's going to get into more vulnerable communities. So you are going to see deaths go back up, unfortunately. Hopefully not at the levels we saw before, and it shouldn't be at the levels we saw before, but higher than what we're seeing now. And the final point is that there's a delay in time of diagnosis to time of death. Typically, previously, it was 2 weeks from the time of hospitalization, patients who were going to die would succumb to the virus. That's probably been extended now, not just because of improvements in care, but because more of the patients who are getting diagnosed much earlier. So we're catching them when they have early disease, and it's going to take longer for them to progress to the point that they succumb to it.
Dr. Gottlieb, it seems by observing the different rules and regulations in the states that have seen these spikes that large gatherings indoors is a big factor leading to spikes. For example, in New York, you're not seeing it, and if restaurants and bars have reopened, it's only outdoors. Does that make you concerned about reaching the fall when the weather takes a turn for the worse, that we're either going to have to see more economic shutdowns again for things like bars and restaurants, or we're going to see spikes in cases?
Look, I think we have a hard fall and winter ahead of us with this, but I think that's all we have. I think this is a 2020 event. We have to get through it. We're going to eventually have a vaccine on the other side of this, hopefully early 2021. But the fall and winter might be tough as this continues to circulate around the country and become epidemic in different regions at different points in time. And yes, the Northeast is still vulnerable. This could come back. And the risk is as we go back to school, as we move indoors in the fall, and as this collides with flu season. You look at what's happening in the South right now, and their testing capacity is being overwhelmed by these epidemics. Imagine the fall when everyone who gets the flu now needs to be ruled out for COVID. And so that's going to put a tremendous strain on our testing capacity. We'll have more testing by then, but we may not have enough to keep up with both flu and COVID. So this is going to be a difficult fall and winter flu season. And the Northeast is still vulnerable. Even though we had a lot of infection, there's still a lot of people who haven't been infected.
As you know, I mean, on the indoor theme, initially China warned that AC was a contributing factor to the spread of the disease. If you look at the states that are hardest hit right now, Florida, Texas, Arizona, super hot states where people go inside to air conditioning. Should we be worried about that?
Right.
Should offices that are reopening be more careful about how they're thinking about their AC units?
Well, look, I think you need to think about air quality in confined settings. And it does seem to be these confined settings where you have what people presume to be aerosolized virus, where you see wider spreading and these super spreading events. It's not happening outside. There was a good study done in China which looked at about 140 different situations where 3 or more people became infected from a single index case. And in all but I think 1 or 2 of those cases, it was indoor settings. So when you move activities outside, that's a safer setting. So things like holding religious services outside, having restaurants set up outdoors. You're right, you can't do that in Houston now where it's 100 degrees, in Phoenix where it's 105, and Miami where it's 95 with 100% humidity. And so that's probably contributed to some of the spread down there. People were moved indoors for the benefit of air conditioning and perhaps had poor air quality in some of those settings, and that contributed to the spreading we're seeing.
Dr. Gottlieb, great to see you as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot.